This video is sponsored by Soylent.
How big, you think?
Well, from here to our capital, to Kyiv, it is 150 kilometers. So even Kyiv wouldn't stand.
Okay, this is complete and utter rubbish. By popular demand, we are looking at Sam and Colby exploring Chernobyl's most radioactive room. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry. From engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Let's check this out.
This is a story about the people who saved the world.
Saved the world. So, evidently referring to the Chernobyl liquidators that cleaned up and did the emergency response after the Chernobyl accident. I don't mean to diminish what they did at all. There were great tales of heroism and personal sacrifice in many of those stories. But to say they saved the world is a bit of an exaggeration. And again, not to fault them, but there's still a lot of people out there that think that Chernobyl would have destroyed the Earth or would have made large portions of the Earth uninhabitable. That's simply not true. The effects of that disaster have been highly exaggerated. And I go into far more detail about that when I reviewed HBO's Chernobyl series, which unfortunately got a lot of things wrong.
A young city literally had the world's most devastating nuclear explosion of all time.
No, not even close. The Tsar Bomba was by far the most devastating nuclear detonation, nuclear explosion at over 50 megatons or 50 million tons of TNT. The Chernobyl explosion was 225 tons of TNT. Not megatons, just tons. Though this wasn't a weapon, this was a power plant, where 1 ton of TNT level of blast is 1 ton of TNT too many. You don't want any explosions there. So this was by far the worst nuclear power plant disaster ever. Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, not even remotely close in terms of how many people died, how much radioactive material was released, or the extent of the cleanup and emergency response efforts.
I thought all of Europe could shut down because of it.
Why did this?
All of Europe shutting down. Well, let's see what he means by that. If by shut down you mean rendering it uninhabitable, untraversable, then again, no, not even close. But if he means by shut down the economic impact, well, we saw higher levels of shutdown in the world from COVID, so it doesn't take anything nearly as radioactive or devastating as Chernobyl to have that sort of effect.
This not happen because the Chernobyl liquidators were risking their lives to save everybody. All of these people, they saved us. They saved you. Yeah, every single person watching this, your lives have been affected by Chernobyl.
Now, it's true that our lives have been affected by Chernobyl, and the main way that our lives have been affected is Chernobyl scared people away from nuclear power. We would probably have a lot more nuclear power plants, and the real number of deaths from Chernobyl, whether you look at the UN estimate of 50 deaths, not just from the explosion, but including the effects of cancer, or the very conservative extrapolation of 4,000 deaths from future cancer rates that include people that haven't been born yet, that still, while horrible, still pales into comparison as to how many deaths occur from coal power plants in terms of how much air pollution and how much radioactivity even. Coal power plants emit far more radiation than any nuclear power plant, including Chernobyl, over time. But the pollution from coal power plants, there's a bunch of crazy estimates out there, but I've seen some as high as 500,000, 1 million in just the United States, and just from all of that pollution. So yes, Chernobyl was horrible, but let's scale this properly relative to other things. And by the way, that number is just from standard operations of coal, not from accidents related to coal, whether it be in power plants or in mines.
See the reactor, talk to a scientist and engineer that knows exactly why the reactor blew off.
Cool, scientist and an engineer. I'll fact check.
Of the checkpoints, but we've been here for like 5 minutes and they're giving our guide Misha a pretty difficult time right now. We've got a lot of paperwork apparently.
Good that they're going through the proper checkpoints, the proper channels, getting all their paperwork permits, everything in order for entering the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It's always important to have permission when entering any sort of radiological controlled area. And that's what the Chernobyl exclusion zone is, a radiological controlled area. Not that it's dangerous to be there now or anything like that, not at all. Radiological controlled area doesn't mean it's dangerous. There are radiological controlled areas at the nuclear power plant that I worked, and I was in no danger and didn't even receive any dose when I go in there. It just means it's controlled, requires permits, wearing of dosimetry, approval, estimates for what you're going to do there, how long you're going to be there, that sort of thing. It's all about nuclear safety. And again, I'm glad these guys got all the permissions that they needed.
What's up, guys? It's Sam and Colby.
We are here with Nate in Chernobyl and Ukraine. Today we are actually inside the power plant.
We might have to wear hazmat suits at one point, but we're about to take a 5-hour tour and figure out exactly what happened to cause the accident of Chernobyl.
I'll tell you what caused the Chernobyl accident right now. The quick version. Chernobyl operations crew needed to do a special test, which was already putting the plant at risk. They deviated in the non-conservative direction from said special test procedures, violating their own safety protocols, including defeating their emergency systems. The reactor was operated in a very unstable condition. They let power sag, and control rods were in a position where they were almost fully withdrawn, and reactor power was oscillating. So you're driving your car, your speed is unstable, and your brakes have been cut. Power surge did occur, which resulted in a steam explosion, because the Chernobyl RBMK reactor was just a big boiling water reactor. When you have a surge, a lot of steam is produced. The resulting damage from that explosion to the core accelerated a reaction with the fuel's cladding and water that resulted in the big buildup of hydrogen, which is explosive. So another explosion occurred. This one tore the reactor apart and out the building. Explosion, radiological release, though at least the reactor was finally shut down at that point, because you can't exactly have a sustainable fission reaction when your reactor is in pieces. What they should have done was emergency shut down the reactor before they got themselves in that unstable condition. That's even what their test procedure called for much earlier on, but they chose to violate it.
This is pretty much as close as you can get to the disaster.
We're gonna hear from actual scientists what went wrong to cause the worst nuclear explosion in history.
Not to ding scientists, being a scientist is an excellent profession, but just scientists, you're only getting one aspect of what went wrong. They'll be able to tell you the physics of what went wrong, very precisely to many significant digits if you so desired. However, to examine the design problems, you'd ask an engineer. And to examine the operational errors, the process failures, the human performance issues, and the question, how did you let your reactor get that far out of control? That's where you need an operations expert.
So we're going to reactor 3 and see the control panel and everything, so we can clearly understand like what went wrong and like what did what. We're going to take out.
So reactor 3, similar design to reactor 4, but was not the one that got destroyed. One thing a lot of people don't realize is just Chernobyl 4 was destroyed. Chernobyl 3 actually continued operation for several years after the accident. None of it's operational now, though.
Oh, dude, I think Colby's excited to get there.
Yeah, man, I want to be in a hazmat suit, man.
Everything, even your socks, you can leave just your underwear.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
So not exactly sure what they're wearing. Not sure why they're taking their shirts off, maybe just for the video. But you can leave your underwear and your shirts on, and even shorts. Most of the time when people wear protective clothing, they usually have scrubs on underneath their coveralls, what they're actually going to be wearing. So not really sure what they're doing here.
What the fuck did she just say?
So they look like, yeah, they're just wearing lab coats, head coverings, masks. Yeah, that stuff's pretty standard. The ones I'm used to wearing are yellow when you wear your scrubs, which are blue, but that doesn't really matter as far as the cover. I see they got hard hats they're going to put on. None of this is really what I would call accident specific. You would wear this sort of stuff going in any contaminated area. Note that in just a radiological controlled area, you could wear street clothes as long as the area is not contaminated. A radiation area is just an area where there are sources that are going to give you radiation, the gamma radiation, alpha particles, beta particles, things of that nature. It's only the contaminated area, which is if you have like radioactive dust on the ground, stuff that you don't want to get on your body, especially not inside your body. Hence the masks. Sometimes you wear respirators depending on what the job is, but if it's just radiation, no contamination, you don't need to wear these kind of get-ups.
Going to heaven right now.
So he said usually the concrete would absorb everything pretty well, but it has absorbed for so long that this golden stuff is just another type of decontamination. All right,
so talking about concrete absorbing, over a long time, for a long time operating reactor, you would have what's called neutron embrittlement, which is exactly what it sounds like. What happens is neutrons, which cause the fission reaction, they make contact with the uranium and split it, giving off your energy. They will come in contact with, say, concrete, reactor vessel, reactor coolant system, that sort of thing. And over a very long period of time, years and years of operation, it will become more brittle because now these neutrons are taking up vacancies, and they just take up space within the lattices, the atomic structures, the layout, and which gives the material a lot of its toughness. So you just have all these deformities there, and the material just gets more brittle, potentially. So in the case of Chernobyl, since you're never going to like rebuild or maintain the thing, really, for the sense of operation, yeah, just putting additional layers of material, kind of what they did with the sarcophagus and the new safe confinement structure would, again, help prevent radioactive material from escaping. But it's really more of a structural thing than a confinement thing.
we're about to go into the reactor area. We're going to sign off on getting these devices, and they will tell us how much radiation we get from going in there and coming back.
Oh, cool. They're getting dosimeters. And again, they're signing in. They're, doing good radiological work steps. When you're entering a zone, you sign in. And most dosimeters, they usually come with an alarm set point. And it depends on the job, what the set point is at. And if the alarm goes off, that doesn't necessarily mean you're in any danger. It just means, hey, you're in a relatively hot spot for the job that you planned on doing. And usually radiation protection personnel are alerted. They come check out the area, and after getting you to a spot away from the high dose area. Just another aspect of radiological safety.
On the ground.
Don't touch anything.
Wow.
Power plant, we don't produce electricity anymore, but we're still involved in general energy system of the Ukraine.
What do you think they're working on exactly, like right now? Is that hard to say?
Control everything. Very difficult equipment, lots of equipment. Central control room.
I didn't understand. The plant is still producing energy.
No. We've got electricity from West Ukrainian.
Again, some of this is not their primary language, but it's really just a matter of monitoring. So the electricity, it's going to be off-site power, as they're saying. They mentioned West Ukraine. And a lot of it is mainly going to be monitoring equipment. I mean, you'll see stuff like the lights are still on.
Okay.
Two of them operated here and transmitted.
Crazy that all this stuff was placed here in like the 1970s, and it's still here today. We're still even using the old TVs, all of this because it works.
I've never expected, but this is like a smoking zone.
Yeah, and in the nuclear power plant I worked at first came online in the 1990s, so there's a lot of old stuff still there in the control room. Now, the control room's not this old, and it's a bit more modern. I can't show pictures of it for obvious reasons, security reasons, but basically you're dealing with the difference between 1970s versus 1990s technology.
It's like we stepped back into the 70s.
Literally, this entire place is lost in time.
Waiting to see which red button to press.
Which red button do you think it is? I think it's that one.
Didn't that's the red button that just fucked everything up right there?
These guys are just being silly. Red buttons or red switches actually shut down the reactor. I know what they're referring to. They're referring to the AZ5 button, and that normally shuts down the reactor and puts everything in a safe condition. However, they were in such an unstable condition, and they waited far too long before making the right call to abandon their test and safely shut down the plant. They also defeated their emergency safety systems, I might add, so that's another contributing cause right there. So that's the reason why they made the too little too late effort of trying to shut down the reactor. Its most unstable condition, which inadvertently was the final nail in the coffin in causing the explosion.
Let's try to get in. Okay, I will switch on the light.
Okay, come in.
Look at all these computers.
Yeah, you have to be a freaking nerd to know how to do all this, right?
100% yes. I can vouch for that.
Nerd. All of these computers probably had the power of like one iPhone.
So he said this
Not even.
entire facility only had them enough like storage and power for 700 kilobytes. That is less than a gigabyte.
Less than a megabyte even. Yeah, very old computers. Our YouTube videos are like 15 gigs. Yeah, it's amazing how far that technology has come.
More storage, this an entire thing times like 10.
Wait, dude, so think about that, man. That means the
It would appear that math aren't these guys' strong suits. Difference between 700 kilobytes and 15 gigabytes is well over 10,000.
computers they were using to run these reactors had less power than what we carry around in our pocket. Dude, I kind of want to bring an iPhone back to the 70s and just watch what they do. You think they...
Well, less storage and computing power. In terms of actual power, it took a lot of power to run all these old machines. So not only were they inferior, they were super fuel inefficient.
Like,
Whoa, dude, porn. What?
what?
Wow.
Whoa. Dude, look at what are you saying?
Whoa.
So those things you see that look like giant Scrabble boards, that is the arrangement of fuel assemblies and basically power distributions. What looks good is you want everything to be relatively stable. That's one of the ways to measure what's known as radial flux. So how much power is being produced in this particular cross-section of the core. You also look at axial flux, which is how much fuel is being produced, say, towards the bottom or to the top of the core. Everything else you see here is just a bunch of old-school meters, position indicators, annunciators, those alarms that go off when something's wrong that they never seem to silence properly in any of the movies.
This is the control room for...
All of the unit number 3.
I've worked in the control room for over 5 years, and rules for working in the control room, not in Chernobyl, but in where I worked, were pretty strict in that you had to have a certain number of reactor operators and senior reactor operators left in there at all times. You had to notify your buddy when you were stepping out to use the restroom, stepping out to eat, or even walking around behind the panels. It's a shame back then, because there were a lot of times where I was hungry, but I couldn't always step out to go to the fridge to get my lunch. This brings us to our sponsor, Soylent. I especially love this banana flavor, because after all, bananas are slightly radioactive. And yes, I checked the ingredients just to be sure it's not like the other Soylent. I really wish I knew about this when I was on shift in the control room, doing a reactor startup, where you have to be there for upwards of 12 hours a day, often without an opportunity to take a break. Since Soylent is portable, no refrigeration required, and no prep or cleanup necessary. After all, wouldn't want to make a mess on the control panels and possibly cause a plant status control event. And now, I'm a father of a newborn, so you can see why I still enjoy easy meals while taking care of my baby son. Also, it is based on science. You don't need to do the intense peer-reviewed research required of a nuclear engineer. They already did all that hard stuff for you. Simply open and enjoy the perfect blend of macro and micronutrients. The first 500 people to use the link in the pinned comment down below and the code TFOLS25 will get 25% off their first subscription with Soylent.
This button right here is the button to shut off the entire reactor. What'd you do?
Did you just fucking make the same mistake?
Everything in this room is completely de-energized. They're not doing anything.
It's like harder to turn your washing machine on.
Not to mention the reactor is already decommissioned, defueled, this doesn't control anything, and there's no nuclear fuel in this building.
On and off to that.
How would you even like figure out what to press
Little
here?
reactor, and you just go click, click.
What would it be happening if like, you know, you're just walking and then you trip?
That is something we actually take very seriously. What he just described, walking and bumping a component, there is a program that prevents this sort of thing called the Plant Status Control Program. It was first initiated actually after 3 Mile Island, where valves that connected emergency feed water to the steam generators, which was a critical system needed to establish a heat sink to safely cool that reactor, were inadvertently left closed when they shouldn't have been. Now, that wasn't the root cause of the 3 Mile Island accident, but it certainly made the accident worse than it could have been. That includes misoperations and bumped components. It's all about ensuring every safety system, and every system, not just the safety systems that's been expanded upon throughout the years, is in their proper configuration, ready to respond in case something happens. Because after all, imagine yourself being a reactor operator. There's a whole lot of systems to keep track of, and you assume that everything is in their proper configuration, ready to do their job. So yes, plant status control events are nasty. And that's one of the reasons why some switches have covers on them, and there are bump guards on a lot of valves left out in the plant so they don't inadvertently get manipulated, just like he described.
Just slam on all these buttons at once.
That's what you're worried about?
You do that at my nuclear power plant, you get fired so fast.
I feel like my clumsy ass would trip in here and like smack something eventually.
Oh my
What if that's like the real story of Chernobyl? No one will say.
Nate
I assure you it's not.
is the producer over here. What's up?
These guys are pretty silly. They're going to Chernobyl, they're learning about nuclear power, their audience is learning more, so hey.
2 seconds ago. Little did you know, did you just send like a ton of energy over back to America?
Do I really need to say you can't launch a nuclear missile from a nuclear power plant, especially one that doesn't have any nuclear missiles or any nuclear material of any kind in there?
Or something? Dude, look. This is the map.
Let's fact check. Are there? Not really. It's pretty well
Flash
documented.
forward after we have realized and learned all about Chernobyl over the past couple days. Detailed breakdown of what happened.
It's extremely complex, and with the whole tour that we did, we just want to summarize it in 1 minute.
So what happened? On April 26th, 1986, in this nuclear reactor, the power plant, reactor number 4, they were
Keep in mind this image is from 2016 or later, because that hangar-like structure did not exist until long after the accident.
conducting safety tests. They were trying to figure out if for some reason the main power source lost power, how could they switch power sources easily?
At the
They must have had a good discussion with those scientists and engineers they talked about.
time, the city of Kiev was receiving power from the plant, and so they requested that the test be postponed so that it was after peak power usage. What that did was move the test from the daytime crew to the nighttime crew, one of whom was one of the main scientists and had only been working there for like 3 months.
So this sort of thing can still happen in terms of having something scheduled for day shift going to night shift. Fortunately, today we have all sorts of operational safeguards in place, and that the special test, both the days and night crews ahead of time would perform this test in a simulator that looks and feels just like the real thing and is programmed to be just like the real plant within reason. Like any other video game, there's going to be a bit of lag involved with it, but for the most part, simulators are quite accurate. But the point is, both of these crews would be ready. There would be so much oversight and superstructure, almost that it can actually kind of get annoying if something were to back up from days to nights. But the point is, it would be there would be such a heavy amount of oversight, and all in the name and in the bias of nuclear safety. The test simply would not occur if anyone voiced any concerns, if it was going to be safe. And no, this wasn't one of those things that you were discouraged from saying that. I've seen several tasks, people just weren't quite ready for, so we postponed them and we did the tests when everyone was ready. Note that I did not do a test that was even remotely as crazy as this was, though.
Panovich Dyatlov, the deputy main engineer of the power plant. He was responsible for conducting the test. Dyatlov wanted to be main engineer very bad. If he will provide the test bad, he won't be main engineer.
You're saying that like he had to make this test go right or else he wasn't going to get a promotion?
So a bit of gaps. Part of it was he had to, so his job was on it, and he was also the pressure that the test had to occur. There was some time pressure associated with that from the higher ups at this power plant.
He had a lot on the line.
For himself.
For himself.
He was very difficult person. He could tell to anybody, so motherfucker, get out from here because you're an idiot. You don't understand anything.
So the guy behind made the mistake. He was a fat dude.
The workers, the engineers here, they of course should be educated, but they should be experienced. Leonid Toptunov was very young and he wasn't so experienced, so he lost the level of capacity.
So one thing I did on my operations crews is for a new reactor operator, I would have a more experienced reactor operator work with them, especially when doing special tests. Sometimes you even bring in people from other crews if like an entire crew was inexperienced and you just plan them out. You might even have the junior reactor operator shadow the test so they see what it's like and they gain that experience, but not actually put their hands on their controls until they feel comfortable, until they've watched the test been done, they've seen it a few times, they're familiar with the procedures, they've had plenty of opportunity to ask a bunch of questions and get their answer so they can safely control the reactor. We would never let any brand newly qualified, newly licensed reactor operator say, okay, you go start up the reactor all by yourself now. No. And there's peer checking, supervisory oversight, additional levels of management oversight, even for the most experienced reactor operators we had. So there are mitigation strategies, and these are discussed during any sort of pre-job briefing, the experience level of the crew.
It decreased up to 10 megawatts, so reactor almost stopped.
And you said...
Okay, it didn't get that low. It actually dipped to 100 and then later 30. I've never heard 10, but I think we're having a bit of a language barrier is at work. So I'm not going to fault that too much.
The reactor is less stable the lower that it is?
The only way to increase the level of capacity is to...
So that's a bit of a complex topic. The short version is yes. Nuclear power plants are designed to operate at pretty much full power all the time for 18, 24 months straight and then shut down. It's not to say the reactor is difficult to control, at least not a current nuclear reactor like a pressurized water reactor or a modern boiling water reactor, but Chernobyl did have some design flaws like those graphite-tipped control rods I mentioned earlier. That was, again, accelerator plus brake at the same time. So that would make things quite unstable. But a lot of it is everything is strictly rated, whether any sort of valves opening, pump speed, water flows, designed to be at 100%. They can obviously operate fine at less than that, but it's not meant to sit there and let power sag for a while like it did.
Pull out all the control rods, altogether 218. He decided to remove all the control rods from the reactor core to increase level of capacity.
So here's why pulling out the control rods is bad. So when you let power sag like this, a reactor poison is generated, and that's known as xenon-135, a common fission product of uranium-235. Xenon-135 has a greater affinity for neutrons than uranium, so it's going to absorb the neutrons and lower power further, because it's absorbing the neutrons, not the uranium. It is competing with the uranium. So it's compounding and letting the power sag. Now this is produced all the time, but if you're at steady state power, xenon is in equilibrium. There are two ways to remove xenon. One is to just let it decay. It has a half-life of about 9 hours. And the other two is to burn it out. After xenon-135 absorbs a neutron, it becomes xenon-136, which does not have the same neutron absorbing quality. So it's effectively used up at that point. So everything's in a nice equilibrium when you're at full power. When you lower power, though, less fissions creates a peak of xenon, which is going to further lowers reactor power. The problem is that xenon will burn out. It has a half-life and it's and it's decaying. So what they just did was they withdrew most of their control rods in order to try to get power back up, which isn't going to because the xenon's at its peak. However, when that xenon decays away and loses that bit of negative reactivity, that's a problem, because then then power is going to spike uncontrollably when that happens.
Level of capacity started increasing immediately. It wasn't minutes, it was just seconds. 200 megawatts, then 3, then 5, then 7, 10,000 megawatts.
So right here, he's talking about the compounding effect of that. So, mention operators withdrawing control rods. That makes reactor power go up. They also lost their feed water because of their uncontrollable configuration that they put themselves in, and that increased a steam void. And Chernobyl infamously has a positive void coefficient. So you increase the amount of voids, reactor power goes up. So this reactor power going up, so we're increasing the number of fissions here, and that's burning away that xenon that I talked about earlier that's keeping reactor power down. So reactor power goes up. And now it's going up super quickly. They panic and try to emergency shut down the reactor, but I mentioned that graphite tipped control rods. There's your accident. They added positive reactivity to the reactor 4 different times in 4 really big chunks, all at the same time. Nowadays, you're only allowed to add 1 form of positive reactivity, especially when you're that low in power.
It went from 0 to not even 100%, but like 10,000%. It was way, way, way higher.
That's not an exaggeration. Power really went that high. Now, the reactor wasn't that high for long because it blew itself up. That's how the reactor was shut down. It was destroyed. It exploded, tore itself apart.
Than they've ever had the reactor running.
The night shift being new, they didn't have the intuition nor the experience to understand quite what was happening. It was
That's a problem.
then that they determined, okay, now we have to shove all the rods back in.
Because if you put all the control rods in a perfect scenario, it would in fact lower everything, and again, that would decrease.
It would emergency shut down the reactor. And at the plant I worked at, it would shut down the reactor in less than 3 seconds.
The power back to normal.
Here's what happened. Because the reactor was running so hot, the tubes that the control rods slide into had actually warped due to pressure and heat.
If everything was designed correctly and all the control rods did and were able to go in, everything would have been fine.
Of course.
Wow, so it kind of was the designer's
Yeah, so no, he made the right decision.
What did they do? They pressed like a button?
They push.
They say it was the designer's fault. It was everyone's fault. You could argue it was more the engineer's fault. I've seen it argued both ways, but it wasn't one person's fault right here. It was the fault of a poor nuclear safety culture combined with Soviet secrecy by not telling the reactor operators a critical component of how to operate the reactor.
Pressed to install all the control rods.
It basically created a small spike of reactivity that sent it over the edge. And so it was the needle that broke the radioactive camel's back.
So they were all pulled out, and then the temperature in here got super hot. They were all pushed back in. And when this got so hot and blew off, this, he was saying, exploded up in the air, went like this, boom, 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 and then landed sideways. And this is how it still is today.
Keep in mind, the reactor roof weighs tons, and it flicked it like a coin.
All the smoke.
One thing I've learned after the amount of years I've spent within the nuclear industry is you have to have a great deal of respect for how much energy all of your systems have.
Smoke up top was just completely like radiated smoke that was flying over the city. So one last question. Nobody has really talked about this yet, but afterward, the core down here was getting so hot that we heard that a lot of people were worried that there was going to be a second explosion.
It could be an explosion because first days, first hours, the main danger for...
I guess he means a third, because I guess they kind of combine. They just mean a later one, I guess, because like I've studied this disaster so much. I know of it as 2 explosions, the steam one and then the one that destroyed the building, the hydrogen one.
Nuclear workers is to leave reactor core without cooling. So for the first few hours, they kept giving water to cooling down the reactor. But of course, was no reactor at all. So all that water collected here in under reactor room. So if that fuel will melt it down the foundation and will get inside that rooms where water collected, it could be enormously huge.
No, not even close to being that big. It would have been another similar steam explosion. Now, I've heard this one, and this was brought up in the Chernobyl series. They said it was going to be something on the order of megatons, which is ludicrously wrong. I've heard this brought up as like a prevailing thought that even some engineers back then thought that. I could not find any reputable source that stated this. No, like, real peer-reviewed source, or certainly nothing on the IAEA's website or INPO's website, both agencies that frequently talk about nuclear industry events. I don't know what caused this thing to spread, but yeah, it could have done some more damage, and it probably could have broke more of the facility, but you're not destroying all of Pripyat with some sort of nuclear bomb that's underneath or whatever this is supposed to be here.
How big, you think?
Well, from here to our capital, to Kyiv, it is 150 kilometers. So even Kyiv wouldn't stand.
Okay, this is complete and utter rubbish. Nothing. Evidently, there's still that myth out there. It would be another explosion comparable to the first steam explosion at Chernobyl. So again, it would be bad. It would have complicated the response. There would have been more debris, more cleanup. It would have been bad, but you're not destroying the upper half of Ukraine or whatever you're talking about here. No.
So it would just completely wipe out everything for 150 more?
Theoretically, of course.
Theoretically, yes. It's about as theoretically, and theoretically I could phase through the entire Earth via quantum tunneling, but you don't see that happening. No, not even remotely. Not even remotely true.
Which means the radiated cloud would affect all of Europe pretty much.
Probably
Just
the
even
entire.
more.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so even if that was true, it would be so diluted that the radiation would essentially burn itself out so much. It's kind of like how hydrogen bombs drive the fallout all throughout the upper atmosphere. It's so heavily diluted, you won't even really notice that much. This sounds like a bunch of crazy fear-mongering. I can't think of any reputable source.
In the entire world? If they wouldn't have...
Just go as far as to say it'll split the Earth in half. You might as well just do that at this point. I can't blame these guys making the video. I'm gonna assume they're not engineers or scientists or anything like that, but this guy, I really hope it's language barrier. I really hope that's what it is, because what he's saying is 100% not true.
Have gotten all the water out of the bottom of the basement, basically all of Europe would have been uninhabitable.
Oh,
Wow.
Dude, you guys are getting played. It's about as crazy as that one nuclear test video I watched a little while back, where they talked about nuclear weapons destroying the Earth. That's the level of insanity we are witnessing right here.
It seriously could have affected the swing of the planet.
We would be walking around radioactive land forever. That could increase the death rate to millions if these people didn't go
You
and
poor
stop
guys
it
are
right
being
then.
Why did
fed
this not
misinformation.
happen? Because the Chernobyl liquidators were risking their lives to save everybody.
And it's so easy to think of Chernobyl as a gigantic tragedy, right? I think in reality, man, what's even more impressive than the accident is how incredible the engineers, the miners, the liquidators, I mean, even the communities that were willing to relocate and work together.
The nurses who healed the people.
How
There we go. Something about triumph of the human spirit and unity to dismiss that. I'm not going to dismiss that. That is, how we respond to various tragedies. Says a lot about our character as a civilization. That misinformation was painful. It was just really painful.
humanity came together to basically stop this radioactive meteor from hitting the Earth is so inspiring.
I don't want to kill your inspiration, because good things were done, but this was all a complete exaggeration. And it sounds like he just watched that episode of the HBO Chernobyl series. So I'm just going to do a quick back of the envelope calculation. So Chernobyl at full power was about 3 gigawatts thermal. So let's make some crazy assumptions here. Imagine the entire core is around the boiling point of uranium, about 4,000 Celsius, and heat capacity, 500 joules per kilogram Kelvin. Heat of fusion's about 200 200, 300 kilojoules per kilogram. So we get about 2 megajoules per kilogram. So let's assume all 1,700 fuel channels are fully down there, fully intact and ready to go, which is a pretty big if, at 150 kilograms per fuel channel. That'll give you 400, 500, 600, on the order of hundreds of gigajoules total, which is less than 1 kiloton of TNT. So again, we're talking comparable to the Chernobyl explosion that already happened. Now, it would have been bad. It would have sent more matter up into the upper atmosphere. That could have caused a problem, more radiological release, and the event certainly would have been worse. So again, I don't want to dismiss what the liquidators did. They did prevent the accident from being much worse, but rendering Europe uninhabitable, come on. Not even remotely true.
And what's really special, in my opinion, about this is these heroes, they weren't really mentioned at all.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that these people killed themselves so we all didn't die. It's time, dude.
But for now, you should switch off your cameras,
We'll see you guys in there.
Going off.
turn it off.
That is the normal level. The normal
3.15 what? Safe.
level over there was 0.2. Here it is.
Okay, they need to provide units here so I can properly evaluate that. If they're talking like microsieverts, then they're all in the safe amount. By safe amount, they probably mean when the alarms go off in their dosimeters. You can adjust that whenever you want. Just because its alarm goes off doesn't mean you're getting an unsafe level of radiation. I really wish they would show me units so I can debunk exactly how bad it is, but something tells me they're fine. If they got their permits and everything approved and everything, they would never put them in a dangerous zone.
Here it is. Holy shit.
Again, everything here could have been prevented. It's just sad every time you see it.
This is the control room of unit number 1.
That button would have turned everything off?
Yes, it used to be here.
That
Easy
is
fun.
the spot. That's the button that was pressed that triggered the final explosion, pretty much.
Clips from the HBO series.
Man, what if you were just kind of like, hey man, how you doing?
Plant status control event, and you would be terminated. And considering this is the Soviets, it probably means worse than being fired.
What only happened to
By the
you?
way, actually, why it was replaced there, because somebody could sit here or something.
Oh, that's actually good. Holy shit. Your like silly joke was like true as to why.
It wasn't a joke, I was being serious.
I cannot believe
It's no joking matter talking about plant status control events. They can be quite tragic.
this. This is the room. This right here.
This is the room where they go in.
MSR. MSR is not a radiation unit that is utilized. You would use rem, millirem, sieverts, typically in millisieverts or microsieverts. MSR, that's not a unit.
Did it fucked up.
One of the most dramatic single pieces of history.
So I know at the control room now, dose rate is approximately a millisievert in about 5 minutes, which is why you're restricted to 5 minutes. A millisievert isn't going to put you at an increased risk of cancer. That's 100 millisieverts. But it is the dose limit for a member of the public. For a radiation worker, it's 50 millisieverts. But this is 1 millisievert in 5 minutes. So you don't want to stay in there for that long, just for the purpose of meeting your administrative requirement. Now, if they got 50, nothing bad's going to happen to them. The threshold at risk where you're at an increased risk of cancer, like I said, is 100. I'm still not sure what units these guys are using.
That might be. What other button in history has ever caused that much damage?
Now, since it said 17.4 MSR, maybe that's how they're abbreviating millisieverts. 17.4 millisieverts per hour, so for 1 every 5 minutes, that would figure out to 12. So it's a little hot. That's probably why those alarms are going off. But I've never seen MSR. Still contaminated. That's why they're wearing the protective clothing.
All right, let's see if Colby is okay to live.
We're gonna find out.
Am I good?
Yes! That's normal, though this is a very old looking one, but considering this is Chernobyl we're talking about, not surprised. You go through something like this to measure, to check if you're contaminated or not when you're leaving any radiological controlled area. You do this even if you're not in a contaminated area, just to be absolutely sure.
That is the most dangerous spot that visitors can go, and we survived. With that, you gotta give a good old like and subscribe. Come on.
I appreciate these guys doing it for their channel, and again, I'm glad they went through all of the proper processes and procedures. I just can't stand that they were given a bag of misinformation from someone that does not know how powerful that explosion could have been. It's disappointing that that myth is still going around to this day. But other than that, I appreciate the recommendation of this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.